We are going to do our next panel discussion on the Jory Apartments that you've heard of already. Had a little bit of introduction. The thing that's interesting and exciting about the Jory Apartments is that they're market rate apartments that also have an affordability component. And if you don't know what that means, it's really cool because it's something that is a neat model to bring to a community. And this team that's put that together has worked for years. As you heard, everything is, years in the making, and they know how to do it. So they're your experts. So for now, I'm going to introduce Jason Eisenbeis, who is the Executive Director of the Marion County Housing Authority, and he's our panel moderator.
Yes. I'm clapping for myself. Yes, I made it here today. All right, so hopefully lunch was good. Yeah, everybody? Yes? I know I keep doing this to myself where I do presentations or I get volunteered to be a moderator, and it's always right after lunch. And this goes back to my old theater days. Like, I could never eat before I could go on stage. It just was not a good idea. So one of these days, I'm going to do something in the morning so I can actually have lunch. So it smelled delicious, so thank you. Eat my portion. So I actually don't need it. So really quick, we want to kind of get an idea of who all we have in the room here today. How many people, you just raise your hand, are government sector? You work for the government, housing authority? Okay, all right. How many people do we have from like the nonprofit sector? Okay, all right. How many people are supposed to be at the meeting downstairs, but we had better food? All right, did I leave anybody out? Any other category we need to get in there? Private sector, thank you, Mayor. And there we go. Perfect. All right. So this is a fascinating story about the North Campus development. And let's see. Am I supposed to do the clicker? Yes. There we go. All right. So before we launch into this, I just really quick want to introduce our panel. So we have Richard Berger. And Richard is the Senior Director of Development at Neighborly Ventures. And Nicole Oots down there, she is, I always screw up her title because I want to say Executive Director, but that's not true. She is the Housing Administrator and has the coolest email address, actually. Email her sometime, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then we have Sarah Long, and she is the project manager for the City of Salem Urban Development. So this is our panel, and Richard, I'm going to start with you. What are we, did it not do the, there it is. Richard, what are we looking at here?
Well, I just wanted to kind of get you guys oriented with Jory. The last panelist mentioned Jory, but I believe we have people from both Salem and outside of Salem. So I just have a few slides to kind of get you oriented on what Jory is and where it is. So this slide shows you kind of downtown Salem, and you can see I-5 there. And the Jory Apartments is right near the state hospital. So if we go to the next slide, this is the area of Jory. Jory is an apartment complex in a greater area called the North Campus. This is former state land that was sold off to several entities. If you just click the next one, keep going. On this greater North Campus is the Dome building, which is a well-known state building. It housed most recently Department of Corrections. Next slide. Included in the North Campus is also Yaquina Hall, which the Housing Authority built. I'm sure they'll talk a little bit more about that. Then, next one. Included in Jory is also the Jory Apartments, the highlight, of course. And then the Delta One subdivision is single-family homes. So overall, this is a bit of a unique project as not just the apartments, which are kind of the focus here, but it's part of a larger development that includes the affordable housing at Uquina Hall, the Jory Apartments, which are a mix of both market rate and affordable housing, and then it also has a single-family home development. And then the final piece, which I don't have a picture for, but it says proposed neighborhood park. That is a park. So the city actually bought some of the land to have open space. So in this kind of core area of Salem, there was several old state buildings that were demolished. You really have a new neighborhood that sprung up through this development that has kind of all levels of housing. And something we really hope will happen is that you'll have people who will work through these different levels of housing from maybe starting at Uquina, then maybe moving into the Jory, and then eventually moving into single-family homes and never have to leave in the neighborhood. So that's kind of an exciting component, and I just wanted to kind of kick you off and have this map on the screen so you get a sense of what this project is.
Perfect. All right, so let's go back to the beginning, right? So what was the initial vision for the Jory Apartments in the North Campus, the North Campus, and how did this collaboration come about between City of Salem and Neighborly, and then Salem Housing Authority got in there as well. So can we talk about that? Richard, go ahead and launch into that, and then we just go right down the line.
Sure. I mean, this project just finished, and it probably started in around 2016 when the state decided and put out an initial RFP to sell it. So that's how long this kind of has been in some kind of development. Neighborhood associations put together, got wind of it being sold, and so they actually put together some planning documents that around that time in the 2016 got adopted in 2018 to kind of see what this vision was for this big open space in the middle of an urban area. And so that's kind of the kickoff date, was all the way back in that 2016 range. We were awarded the RFP for it back in 2017. Construction didn't actually start till 2020. So there's this huge 3 years it took to put the Jory project together, along with all the infrastructure and all the other components. We were looking at it as a market rate project originally, but it really struggled to pencil. And as we were looking at it, the city approached us and said, "We know you build a lot of apartments in town. Are you interested in putting an affordable component in it?" So it was originally the kind of original collaboration to make this an affordable piece really did come from the city itself approaching us and saying that we think there's an opportunity here. And so from there it became a lot of work to create a totally new program using an urban renewal district to help subsidize affordable housing. So it really started with the city and then became this collaboration. And the project was really complicated because it was old state land. There was huge infrastructure needs on it. And then the city was trying to finance their affordable housing right next door at the same time. So there were a lot of complications.
All right, so Urban Renewal District, we're good. What is it? Sarah, enlighten us.
I knew you were going to ask me that question. So from a really high level, urban renewal district or tax increment financing, I'm sure a lot of you have at least heard it maybe in one form or the other, are the same thing. And so basically the goal is you set upon some sort of a geographic boundary, and you're looking at an area that needs public improvements, that's blighted, that has some sort of a value to the community that just isn't being realized. And you go through, it takes about 12 to 18 months to establish it. The process is set by the state legislature, so we as the city don't come up with how the process works. And so the first step is you figure out what's the area. So most of our URAs here in Salem, we have well, 8, I like to say 7, but we have 8 because we have Jory, are, 200 acres, 400 acres, 500 acres. So they're capturing a lot. You're in one right now, actually. This is the riverfront downtown urban renewal area. We used funds to help, build this building that we're in today, actually. And what happens is once you pick that geographic boundary, you go through the public process, it freezes what the property taxes are that are going to the taxing districts. So what happens is as property values start going up, that increment starts coming into the urban renewal area. Those funds can only be used within that geographic boundary. And at the end of the urban renewal area, ours are dictated by the dollars that we can collect. Then the urban renewal area goes away, and that increment that's been collected over whether it's 10, 15, 25, 30 years now gets redistributed to all the taxing districts. So the goal of sort of when you create an urban renewal area, you want to make sure that, especially for something like this where it was a single property, it's the first time we've ever done it, it needs to have a pretty low tax base, because if the increment is only going to be a very small amount, then there's not a lot that we can work with. And so for this particular project, they weren't in an urban renewal area, so as a city we had very limited tools to try and come up with some financial incentives. And we kind of took the concept of what we do with all our other urban renewals and said, well, why can't we apply it to a singular property instead of 400 acres? And so that sort of was the metamorphosis for Jory, and it was kind of a trial run to see how is this going to work. One of the differences, I guess, with Jory than with a normal URA is you're collecting increment over years. So you might have a grant program, you might have funds set aside to start doing infrastructure work. Well, with this, because it's a singular property, the way that we were able to set it up is it's a tax rebate program. We did not put any money into the actual construction of the project, but what we do is in order to incentivize maintaining the affordability aspect, the developer pays their property taxes just like normal, the URA collects their portion, and then we actually then rebate it, minus a 3% fee that we hold back for administrative purposes. We rebate it back to the developer as long as they're maintaining sort of those requirements that we have within the development agreement for the affordability.
All right. Everybody get all that?
It was a lot, sorry.
So Nicole, you're a housing authority. You don't necessarily have to pay property taxes. So how did the Housing Authority of Salem get pulled into this project? Not the Jory Apartments, but the North Campus area.
I'm pretty sure the Housing Authority got pulled into that project in 2015 when the state of Oregon had contacted us about the Yaquina Hall, Building 33, nurses dorm. It has lots of different names. It was the former nurses' quarters, and there was an interest, just like the RFP process with the state of Oregon. My former predecessor, Andrew Welch, had decided that that was our next project, and we were going to make that into housing. Little did we know that would be an 8-year process. Yes, we win the award for the longest project ever, but this is a historic preservation of the old nurses' quarters, and we actually thought we were done April 5th of this year with a grand opening event until our power got cut 2 weeks later. So we're in the process of getting that building up and running, and through the timeline of this whole process, as they say, feasibility and all the different steps that were talked about earlier, and I won't go back into them, it literally took many times over. We've done that feasibility process 3 times over to get Yaquina Hall to the finish line. And when they talk about the cost involved in that pre-development and your risks, this is an area where the Housing Authority has committed so much funds to pre-development to make this project work that there was a risk that if we didn't get this completed, or how long was this going to go on, and it all had to do with the subdivision and the platting and the engineering and the process that just continued to get delayed before either one of us could actually buy our subdivision lots. But I will say that through the course of that time, we originally applied for historic tax credits and Oregon Health Authority funding for serious and persistent mental illness. That project, I believe it started at $9 million in 2015-16. by the time we ended up closing Yaquina Hall, and it really turned into about an $18 million project, just with all the different delays, the hangups, the feasibilities, the ongoing, suddenly we're closing during COVID, suddenly we're closing during the highest market inflation costs. You cannot predict everything that's going to happen during this course of time. We also had this huge need for supportive services, and so we morphed this project into not only just an affordable housing project with 20 set-aside units, but adding wraparound services now on site because that need was great in Salem. So that's pretty much how Yaquina came to life.
Right. Yes. 8 years. Yeah. Get into affordable housing, they said. Right? You just want to run out and take 8 years to build affordable housing. I know it's tough, and it's a testament to perseverance because that's what it takes for a lot of these developments. So I know, Richard, you talked about the green space that was there, and if you could just kind of let us know, how did that work out with the surrounding neighborhood? I would imagine there had to have been some pushback, and I think we all run into it when we're trying to build affordable housing, as we get a little bit of the NIMBYism, not in my backyard. How were you able to address that and move forward and persevere for the 7 years it took to get that project done?
Yeah, there's actually uniquely 2 neighborhood associations that border this property, so it wasn't just talking to one group of neighbors, it was actually multiple. And there are single-family homes directly across from that site, which create this very personal level nature we were dealing with on this old site. Additionally, although there were some buildings on it, there was green space kind of all around the buildings, so it was really served as a park, which is one of the reasons why the city stepped in and bought a big piece of it to maintain as parkland. But in my initial conversations with the neighbors, it was fairly straightforward. I'm looking at developing this, and I will build nothing better than the park green space you're used to. I cannot, no matter what I build, it's not going to be a park anymore, and that's because the state's going to sell it. So I just went in the mentality of, you're losing a great asset, but if you can work with me, we'll work together to make it the best possible outcome for you. And over that 3-year period, I was at the neighborhood constantly, and we constantly changed our plan to try and accommodate them. And if you look at this site plan, something that's really unique about it is on the major roads, you'd normally have multifamily. But across the street from those major roads are old single-family homes because this is a neighborhood. So what we did is we actually flipped the script of the site plan and put the multifamily internal to the block and lined the roads with single family. So those old homes that used to look at green space, now we're looking at the front doors of neighbors. Okay, so if you drive down D Street or Park Street, you'll actually see front doors on both sides of the street, which really creates a nice streetscape and makes sure that although these are busier streets, they're still neighborhoods and they still have that feel, which really gets you to slow down traffic and let people know who do have to pass through, because these are busier areas, that this isn't just a normal thoroughfare highway, it's really a neighborhood. So in the end, after a lot of work, a lot of discussions, a lot of changes, both neighborhood associations supported our plan, and there was actually a little bit of a fight because this was old state land. The city council had to decide which neighborhood association it would be in once it no longer became, and both of them wanted it. So I stayed out of that fight, but I did pay attention because I really appreciated that after all of this, both neighborhood associations wanted our development as part of their neighborhood.
So both Nicole and Richard, you mentioned the infrastructure challenges that kept popping up or were present when you went to develop. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you had to go through, especially with the state hospital involvement, and how you were able to resolve those issues.
I can tell you, if it weren't for collaboration between the city of Salem, Richards and his team, the Housing Authority would never have Yaquina Hall to this point today. It literally took all of us coming to the table and going, how are we going to make this subdivision work, this North Campus project, so that we can all get it off the ground? There was no way for the Salem Housing Authority, who had a multi-year lease agreement for an empty, vacant, gutted building, to do anything with it until we actually had a lot or a parcel for us to purchase and make sure that it aligned with our environmental reviews. And through the course of time, there was supposed to be parking, not parking, but because of the right-of-way situation and having to work as a team between all the different entities, coming to the table to try to ensure that we don't lose an opportunity to provide this affordable housing is how we were able to make it happen. The city did part of one street, picked up the purchase of the park, which actually allowed for additional parking. Eunice Kim and her team through our Salem was able to do a revamp to where we didn't have to have a parking requirement any longer for us to be able to do this project. By the time we actually got it to closing, we were compliant with that. And then if Jory hadn't come in and put the right-of-way in, there would be no subdivision or the selling of our lot for Yaquina Hall. So it really was a collaboration of everybody coming together. But without Neighborly Ventures and Richard's team putting the actual roads in, which was that one step that was keeping us all from getting this off to the ground, it obviously had a lot of hurdles through the subdivision, which I'll let you discuss how we got delayed for that.
Being an old state site has its advantages and its disadvantages. If you went on the site, you saw roads going through the site, but it was all one gigantic parcel, and the state had roads going through it that didn't meet any code, didn't meet any standards, and the state started to say, well, you take this piece, you take this piece, but it wasn't actually platted. So the first thing that had to happen is all this infrastructure had to be built for everyone to take their individual pieces, although no one project could kind of absorb the cost of all the infrastructure that was needed. And it was further complicated by the state decided to take a phased approach. So they approved one subdivision, didn't put in any infrastructure, subdivided that in again, didn't put in any infrastructure, divided it again, didn't put in any infrastructure in. So you had like 3 levels of subdivision that needed all this infrastructure and then had to be kind of platted all at once. So that was really the complication, and it was a lot of time trying to divvy up these costs between the parties in an equitable manner, including the state, who worked really hard on trying to figure out, they had kind of said, you're getting this and you're getting this. Well, it's hard to divide a street, The street gets built. The sewer line, it's hard to allocate those. So it was a lot of times and a lot of collaboration and a lot of trust in trying to get something fair. And it takes a ton of time, and those architects and those engineers cost a ton of money. So everyone's burning money trying to design this as well as make it sure it's fair for them. And that's a process that I don't think you go into unless you have a certain level of trust. And we'd worked with the city before. We built the Cornerstone Apartments, which is an all-affordable complex. So we had a certain level of trust that at least we were all working towards the same thing and we all had the same goals, even if it didn't end up working out. So we were willing to enter that. And after 3 years and many times where we thought it might die, we came up with a deal and were able to build that property, that infrastructure.
Anybody out in the audience have any questions in regards to the property's construction, infrastructure, anything like that, before I hop into my next question, which I'm sure we're all curious. Anybody? Nope? Okay, I'm going to ask it. So how does the affordability work at the Jory Apartments? And this is for Richard. So if you can elaborate on that and how you've position those apartments in the complex?
So, as we mentioned at the beginning, the unique thing about Jory is it does have both market rate and affordable. It's primarily a market rate projects. It's 246 three-story, what I call woody walk-up apartments, large common building. You can see the common building on the slide if it wasn't me. As part of our urban renewal, the tax rebate we get about 86% of our taxes back, and for that we provide 15% affordable housing, okay? One of the things we learned from building a 180 unit all affordable complex at Cornerstone is we didn't really like to create a project where it's all this one level of affordability. So if someone came in and they like, I have a need, and we're like, yeah, you have a need, but you either make too much or make too little. Go find somewhere else. Like, you have this narrow band, right? And we really didn't like that. And most federal funding just either it makes you do that or the hoops you have to do anything else are just impossible. But since we were kind of creating a new program with the city, we actually set it up where we have a range of affordable at this complex. So we have 5% at 80% AMI, 5% at 60%, and 5% at 40%, and then the rest at market rate. So when we're in lease up and when we have people, we ask, what's your income? What's your situation? And they generally have this broad range that they could fit into. If they're making market rate, we say, we've got some great market rate options. If they're making less than that, we're like, okay, you fit into our 60% model. Here's a unit for you. And what's really cool about Jory is there's no difference in the units. They are absolutely 100% the same units, and they aren't separated in any way. So you have an 80% that's on the third floor over there, and an 80% that's on the first floor over in that building. They're separated throughout the building. We kind of set it at the beginning where they'd be, but the idea is we can move them. Like if we get a bunch of people who need the 80% who need 3 bedrooms because maybe they all had bigger families, we can kind of move those around. And the idea is to keep them diverse, and no one knows that they're living next to someone who's at 40% AMI. Unless that person decides to tell their neighbor, nobody knows. So that's a really unique thing, and it's only a program we were able to work out with the city of Salem.
So a follow-up question to that. Do we have any affordable housing property managers, site managers out here in the audience today? Anybody? There's got to be at least one.
Not one?
There we go. Yeah, so how much paperwork is that, right? I mean, come on, right? Yeah, we want to know the paperwork, and who's monitoring this? Is it anybody from OHCS here today? Oregon Housing and Community Services? No? Okay, we can make fun of them then. So, oh, no, we can't. Who's checking that people are moving in below your income limits? It's Sarah. Okay. All right.
So we modeled the program off of a LIHTC program. So our standards are really the same. But so it was just easier, and we manage LIHTC, so we're used to that and we're comfortable with that. But since we were working with the city, we really have a much closer monitor, and they get to come in, and the idea is they audit us once a year and can come in at any time, look at our books, confirm that we're doing the affordable housing we committed to through our agreement. It does simplify the paperwork because we don't have all the different levels that kind of look at these things, and we don't have as many audits as I think we would have with LIHTC, but we still get the review from the city, and they're the ones who hold us to our contract.
I would say the goal is to make it as easy as possible, but at the same time transparent. We don't want to bombard anybody with more paperwork, but at the same time, we are using public dollars, and so we need to hold everyone accountable for that. And so we've put together, I would say, I think we've gone through it once now, so we're learning what works and what doesn't work. But we've gone through one rebate process now, and it's a pretty simple process for us. I mean, basically what happens is after the developer pays their property taxes, so sometime between November and December, they provide us proof of that, along with a compliance letter. And in the letter, it just states, we're still meeting these objectives depending on what's in that particular development agreement, and it's a notarized document. And then attached to that is the rent rolls from the previous year. And so it just shows that the units were occupied, it shows at what value and what rent levels they were. We come just take a quick look at it, make sure it's matching the HUD numbers, and then after that, we put it in the file, we say that, you know, they're good to go, and once the tax increment financing comes in, then we can go ahead and release that out as a check. So it kind of makes it nice because it's a nice, easy timing. You pay it, we check your numbers, and then you get that rebate in about April of every year. There is a little bit of a lag time. So, you know, that's I think where this program works for some and doesn't work for others. You know, some developers that I've spoken with, they need the more money. They don't want to have to pay the tax, or they want it a lot quicker. If we pay our property taxes in October, can you just turn around and write us a check in December? And unfortunately, that's just not how it works. We don't get the money in one lump sum check. It'd be great if we did. We get small little portions of it over a couple of months. And so because there's only one source of income coming into that particular urban renewal area, that's the only place we can draw funds from. And so there is sort of this delay where you have to be able to front the tax bill and then still carry over before we can go ahead and issue you that first rebate. And I think that first year is where it's probably the trickiest, and then after that you're kind of getting into a cycle because you're going to get a rebate in April, yeah, you're going to pay in October, but you can kind of roll those funds, you know, through the process a little bit.
Okay. All right. And so aside from that, do you have regular inspections, or are you just self-inspecting units to?
At this point, we haven't gone out and done inspections. We could, if at any point in time, you know, and it may be every 3 years or every 5 years, we've kind of been talking about it. But at the same time, right now we only have this one project, and we have a great relationship, and I think that plays into it too. Are we hearing that maybe the development isn't being, you know, maintained? Are we hearing there's problems? And then that's when we're going to go and check out. But there have been conversations about should we, you know, put in a notation of every 3 years or every 5 years to expect it. But we do put in to allow us the ability at any time if we need to go in and inspect units or do some monitoring, we can.
Great.
I think the fact that we have, we are primarily a market rate development company. We develop all over kind of the western United States, but Salem is our home. And so we have done quite a bit of affordable housing, a little bit as a philanthropic effort in our community here in the Valley. And that's really the way we've looked at it. And because we do our own management as well as development, we've managed that affordable housing, which really helps us. I feel like if a true market rate developer were to come in and maybe try and manage it identically to a market rate, they'd struggle. But I think since we manage both a lot of affordable and a lot of market rate, we were able to kind of combine those with staff that we brought over from affordable housing projects, really felt comfortable with the paperwork and felt like, oh, instead of 8 steps, this is, 6 steps. That's better, right? As opposed to like, instead of 2 steps, that's 6 steps. That would have been a tougher transition. So I think that really helped us on our management, and we self-manage it, so we really felt comfortable with management. And affordable housing management is a huge part of that burden and can trip a lot of people up.
Anybody out here have any questions?
What is your process for acquiring affordable housing applicants? So, because one of the parts that's very attractive about this model is that I might live in one apartment and pay full rent, and my neighbor, who I think is the greatest guy in the world, might be low income, and I don't necessarily know that until he tells me. So how do those low income applicants learn about and then get on a list for your particular, for Jory?
Yeah, I would say in some economies, maybe we'd need a process, but in this, the grapevine heard about it, and so we had a waiting list we had to shut down before we were opened. I mean, before we were open. So really, it's, in this case, was just word of mouth. We only had 36 units, so, I mean, there was a very long list. The hardest were the 80%, because I think there's a lot of people who just didn't know about that middle ground. Like, they're like, either they came there as a market rate, and then, or they heard about it as affordable, so they truly were in that affordable level. The 80% was not as quick, but a lot of, I actually had a great conversation with our assistant property manager right after it opened, and she said, you know, when you built this, I really didn't understand why we had 80%. Like, it just seems like a weird number, and I've never been in a property like that. And then she had a family come in with a mother and 3 kids, and they came in for market rate, and she said, you don't qualify. And the mother was just dejected, like, I've looked all over town, I just need an apartment, I've got these 3 kids. And the assistant manager was like, well, why don't, I think you're gonna apply, you can, you know, qualify for this 80%. And so she applied, she got into the 80%, she was so excited, and the assistant manager made a point to come to me and be like, I didn't understand why you did it, but man, we really helped someone there who was in a real spot, and if we wouldn't have had this kind of in-between level, they wouldn't have been helped.
Yeah, that 80%, that 60% AMI to 80% AMI, you know, housing range is a real lack out there, and I'm looking at you, OHCS. So it's fantastic that with the urban renewal district that created an avenue to be able to offer what's still, you know, an affordable unit at a low income level, but it's a segment that's oftentimes ignored, especially with any, you know, new affordable housing under the low income housing tax credit program, home program, you know, all our alphabet soup programs. So the urban renewal district, so I just wanted to clarify for everybody. So you were looking to develop the property prior to the urban renewal district being implemented. So once the urban renewal district came into play, how did that change your design considerations? Did it allow you to do, you know, more with the construction of the property when that urban renewal district came into play? And also, how did that affect your financing for the property?
So we were looking at it, but the reality is we were not going to build it. The infrastructure costs were incredibly high. It was an incredibly complicated process. So bringing that additional subsidy to the table really allowed the whole project to happen. And there were several things that kind of moved us from we looked at this and we're kind of going through some early feasibility, but we're about to drop it, to actually deciding to move forward. One is obviously the economics helped a little bit, so there's a little bit more money in it. Having the different incomes meant our lease up we felt would go better, because you had units, you didn't have to find as many market rate people in this neighborhood, kind of a unique neighborhood, not a lot of new housing, so that was a risk. And then the other thing is, this was an incredibly complicated project. And we were like, how much feasibility are we gonna spend on this mess that the state has on their hands? And by having the city as a partner saying, hey, we want something to happen here, we wanna talk to you about this, we felt like, you know, this is probably gonna happen. It's worth continuing to spend money on this. Because a lot of times you have a great idea and the city or the local jurisdiction doesn't really want it to happen, and they can slow you down, they can stop it, and just knowing that in the end they wanted it, it really helped us move the needle from this is a project we want to jump into to a project we don't. As I said, we travel all over the Western United States, and one of the first things we do when we look at housing is go talk to the city and say, do you want housing here? And if they say no, or if we get the sense, well, if you do all these things, maybe, there's other towns. Like Salem's our home, we're gonna do it no matter what, but when I look at other jurisdictions, I try and get a sense, do they really want me there? And if they don't want me there, I won't be there. And knowing the city of Salem and knowing that they were talking to us and talking about their kind of dreams of the site, that really helped us move the needle.
So, Nicole, do you have anything you want to throw in there about Yaquina, or are you just trying to put it out of your mind right now?
I don't think there is an end to Yaquina, so I don't think it's coming out of my mind anytime soon, no. There's a greater need. I can tell you that when we opened, Yaquina Hall is a historic, you're actually in the URA, and our building is in a historic tax credit or jurisdiction or area. So we were able to apply for historic tax credits for that location, which really helped enable us to be able to make this project happen. I will say, though, with the continued delay after delay after delay, that gap financing they were talking to on this map of multiple funders, that's reality. This project has a ton of sources and uses on it to keep it alive and keep it going. But it's a beautiful project. It will open. It's serving 52 one-bedroom units, 51 one-bedroom units, and one studio that's actually not on the rent rolls for somebody to move in that maybe needs to work in the building but have additional place to live. And within probably, I can tell you, we opened the waiting list to that on a Saturday night at midnight, and within 24 to 48 hours, we had over 300 applicants on the list for that building. And I think we're sitting over 500. I know we have the majority of the units fully approved and ready to move in. The neighborhood's been great. Nesca is the one that actually fought for us. And they won. And they're so proud to show off their buildings, and they're being a great member of the community and wanting to be involved. But keep those neighborhoods, keep in communication, make sure they know what's going on well before you ever start these projects.
Yes, yeah.
And the neighbors change. That's the other thing.
Oh, yeah, we had that problem too.
You know, over 8 years or 3 years or even 2 years, the neighbors change. So you go talk to a group, they're excited or not excited, and then if you don't continue to talk to them, you come back in a year and you're like, wasn't I at this group? They're different. So I really recommend continually keeping that up and keeping them informed, because even if you've told them it's going to be 15% affordable, they hear rumors, and if you haven't talked to them for a year, they've changed what you said. Now it's 50% affordable, or it's this group, and so really that continuous communication is really important. And I thought they were really great because they were not diametrically opposed to affordable housing, which a lot of groups are. They said, this is a need in our community, but we don't want it to be all affordable. And so they really love the single-family homes, which are for sale. They love the market rate. They love the green space better, but they were not opposed to the affordable housing.
And I think it makes it really important. It encourages our residents to see that there is stepping stones if they want to continue to stay in the neighborhood. We have lots of conversations about that. I think that's important for somebody who may be stabilizing and returning into the market, that there is ability to leave Yaquina Hall in 12 months and take that voucher and potentially go over to Jory and get a bigger size unit and carry on with life in the same neighborhood they were.
It really is a beautiful neighborhood. If any of you all haven't been out there yet, it's that way, right? Okay. I used to walk like 20 blocks the wrong way when I got off the subway in New York City, so yeah, my wife makes fun of me all the time. So that way, so drive by it. It's great. It's a testament to these mixed income developments, because as an industry, and I'm sure we've all been on our soapbox about this, is we're constantly fighting the old idea of public housing, low income housing, the projects, and it's a battle. But by really developing apartments like these, you know, we're helping the problem, right? We're helping to solve that perception. So, Sarah, we got to get back on these urban renewal areas here. Got to see how much time I got. Yep, you got enough time to talk about them. So, what else is in the works? So, could you talk about, you know, the role of the Jory Apartments and how that's kind of influenced the urban renewal agency to plan for further developments?
Yeah, definitely. And just as a clarification, because it gets confusing to a lot of people, when we refer to the Urban Renewal Agency, although technically it's a different legal body, it is the same physical body as the City Council. So City Council and the Urban Renewal Agency are the same people and members, they're just different legal agencies. So just as a clarification, if we're talking about agencies, obviously we have the mayor right here. He is part of the agency as the mayor, but also as part of the agency as well. And so one of the things that really happened is after Jory, and I think it kind of goes back to the word of mouth that Richard was referring to, we slowly started hearing from other developers. What's this concept? You know, what did you guys do at Jory? How did you kind of, you know, what is this rebate situation? And what we found is, although legally and based on state statute, we can go in and do single URAs all over the city, one of our concerns was, well, we kind of want to get the information out there. We want to be able to promote this program, but we have to create a program to really put something out there. And so what we did is we looked at Jory and what was successful about it. And actually in September of this past year, we went to the agency and we asked them, we said, you know, we'd really like to create kind of this formal single property urban renewal area program specific for affordable housing. And the agency was fully on board. And what we did is we just created some baselines so that when people start looking or when people come to us, they have an idea of expectations of kind of, you know, we need at least this from you to really start talking because, you know, as I mentioned, it can be a 14, 18, 20-month process. Part of that is staff time, just in developing plans and reports. We have financial consultants that will do all of our financial rebate analysis that we'll put into those that'll give sort of an approximate schedule so that the developer knows, hey, this is what you think you're gonna get over the life of this rebate. Is it gonna work? And we wanna make sure the numbers are as good as possible. And so we do need to kind of have some baselines because we don't wanna be running all these numbers and spending all this money if you really don't have an affordable housing project ready to go. And so what we kind of put into place is that, you know, the first piece of it is you have to do at least 15% or 20 units of affordable housing, whichever is greater. So it's a little bit different. Most programs, it's whichever one is less. For us, it's whichever one is greater. But we don't define what affordable is in our program. So for this particular project, it worked that 60% AMI average is what worked out. But we could have a developer come to us and maybe the numbers are a little different, or the numbers they can't quite make in AMI, but they're able to make up for it in other ways. Maybe it's, you know, they're gonna waive move-in fees, or they're gonna have a lesser increase of rent per year than is required, or they're gonna come up with something else. Because what's gonna happen is we're gonna have a separate development agreement. And so every potential, you know, property or development that's under this is still gonna go back before our agency to say, hey, does this work? So we create kind of this broad baseline for the program, but then every development we're looking at a little bit differently. The other thing is you can't have any other tax exemptions. It just wouldn't work. We're already taking your property tax, so if you have a property tax exemption, how would we be able to kind of give you anything? And then you need to have a development concept. It's really hard for us to tell you what we might be able to provide in a rebate if we don't know what the value of your project is gonna be at the end of the day. And that seems to be the trickiest part, especially with the market that we're in. You know, the numbers are constantly changing and the values are changing. But at a certain point, we have to lock down to say this is, you know, whether it's, you know, maybe it's $100,000 or $200,000 or $3 million, whatever it might be, we have to lock in on that number because we need it to create the urban renewal area so that the taxing districts know, hey, when you collect that 2.5 million, you guys are done with that one, and as the taxing district, we're gonna start getting those dollars back. So we've created a baseline program now, and it's on our website if you're ever looking for it. It's pretty easy to find under our incentives page, or you can always contact me. We also link to our SDC waiver program that's tied to affordable housing. We're trying to layer in as much as we can. And then, you know, ever since then, we've just been getting a lot of calls. I've probably met with 8 or 9 different developers, and they're all different types. We have folks that have only done market rate that are now really interested in contributing to the affordable housing that we need in the area. And so they're looking at phasing projects. We have developers who are looking at maybe senior housing and how could this program maybe work with something that's senior housing related. We have folks looking at large mixed use kind of developments in a couple different areas of the city. And we've talked about, you know, could this be something that we could integrate into what they're doing as well? And Richard and I are working on another project together right now, actually. So it must not have been too painful.
So when you're talking about market rate, and obviously if a housing authority was to build, we're exempt from property taxes, so it wouldn't work for us. But an affordable developer maybe using LIHTC, it's gonna work for the market rate guys that are gonna put.
Yeah, or if you have a tax incentive that's not tied to your property taxes, because remember that the rebate's coming from what you're paying in property taxes. So if you're getting any reduction, then the rebate isn't going to be enough that it's really going to make sense to go through the process. It's really, I say it's sort of a 3-prong process. We have the creation of the urban renewal area, which is a lengthy process in itself. Subsequent to that, the developer is responsible for getting the exemption through BOLI because they would be receiving over $749,000 in public dollars. And so unless they want to pay prevailing wage, they do have to get that exemption from BOLI, and that's on the developer. And so that's sort of happening at the same time. And then the third piece to that is the development agreement. So it's sort of this 3-prong process that has to happen in order to really make it work. And so it does take time.
Do we have any questions from any developers or mayors? Oh, over. She's already over there.
You just cut off the man.
All right, I just had a quick question. If there's a certain size of development that you're looking for these urban renewal areas?
At this point, we don't have any sort of a size requirement. It's really tied to the number of units or the percentage. So it's sort of, you have to be able to make it work to either do the 20 units or 15%, whichever is larger. But there isn't a size requirement. So it's sort of, what does it look like? And then if you have that, running the numbers and seeing like, does that work for the developer's end of things? That's really where the question comes down at the end of the day, because we can run the numbers all day long, and of course it's, if we're getting the units, it works for us, but does it work for the developer? And that's what we try to work through. And sometimes we'll do multiple iterations over and over again to figure out, okay, it's not working, but now the market's shifting, or let me change our project a little bit so that there's some more value so that maybe, that would work a little differently. And we can run those numbers numerous times. It's not sort of like a one time and that's all you get. I mean, a lot of folks will do numbers, 5, 6, 12, 15 times for until, it makes sense for everybody at the end of the day. Mm-hmm.
All right. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. I had a couple of points I wanted to make. One, or actually the first two, they're kind of, Richard and Nicole are telling their story, but they're not telling the whole story here. These projects would not have happened without these two individuals and their teams and their perseverance. Richard, I sat through neighborhood meetings with him for many years. This is my ward when I was a city councilor. And if you ever want to know how to work with a neighborhood association as a developer, go talk to Richard, take him out for coffee, and have a conversation. He masterfully handled this thing that they were not excited about this in the beginning. He's talking, kind of telling you the nice.
You're making me blush. Man.
Well, that's fine. He's telling you the good parts, but I'm telling you, he had a crowd that was not super excited in the beginning, and they love Richard now. They are full partners. And it's because of the work that he did and the effort that he put in working with that neighborhood and his team put in working with those neighborhood associations. It was really a masterclass in working with neighborhoods, and I got to witness it firsthand, and it was a real privilege. And Nicole, in terms of Yaquina Hall, we're talking about all of the problems that we had with we continue to have problems. We tried to put in cable TV and Comcast cut our power. And now we are, I don't know how many weeks later, we're still waiting for the power to be restored. But this project was fraught from the beginning. So I just wanted to really highlight their efforts. I know they're not willing to say it themselves, but I'm willing to say it about them. They did amazing work on this thing. And you really do go out there because it's beautiful. There are walking trails, swimming pool, community room, there's all the things, and it's pretty amazing. And so you really should see it. So thank you for all your work. I just have one more point, and that was over to Sarah and urban renewal. So one of the things that's really nice about these single property urban renewal areas from a policymaker perspective is we, as the urban renewal agency board, the city council, we get to make the decision on whether this happens or not. We're not dependent on other taxing districts. Where some of our tools, like MUTIP and some of those, rely on getting majority votes from other taxing districts, which can be a little bit of a challenge. So that's one of the really nice benefits, I would just say, to the policymakers in the room. You get to do this on your own without having to rely on other community partners to make it happen, which we've tried that a couple of times with mixed results. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you. I take it from this development you're describing, it's a development of apartments. I may have missed it during your presentation, but who is the current owner of the land?
So it is a market rate apartment complex. Our investor owns it, who's a local Mountain West Investment Corporation. We're the developer, Neighborly Development. So they still own it. They luckily have a business model where they generally build and hold. So they hold it for the long term. That's just their general model, but they're the owner.
And Yaquina is owned by its partnership as well. It's no longer state-owned land.
All right, so we're just about to wrap up here, if my watch is correct. Any final questions? So, over here, yes. The mic is on its way. Nobody trip her. She works for me, actually. That would be bad.
Thanks. I was just wondering if you've been in operation with this or other apartments doing the same thing, where you've noticed a difference in the percentage of evictions in the lower income apartments or a non-renewal of the lease, and what those evictions commonly are for. And the other question I have is how many of these units are ADA accessible?
I don't know the numbers on that. We've been in operation. We're fully stabilized now, so some of our first, annual turnovers were over the last few months from our first units because we leased up over time. You don't open all at once. So I don't know right now if there's a differential. That will be fascinating over time to see, who's renewal, who's not. And I don't know, we're meeting code on the ADA. We're 3-story walk-up, so no elevator. My understanding is all the first floor, and the project manager of this project is in the room. He could answer it better than I am. But I believe the whole first floor is ADA adaptable. And then I don't know how many are accessible.
So was there ever a requirement for a certain percentage to be fully accessible when you built?
No.
Okay.
It's per the code, which in Woody Walk-Up is that whole first floor has to be adaptable, is my understanding. I don't believe any percentage has to be accessible.
All right. Any final questions? So my last question, I guess this would be for Nicole and for Richard. If you had to do it again, would you still do it?
You can start.
Remember
Yes.
how beautiful that building is. Yeah.
Yes, it turned out beautiful. It's been a long haul, lots of complications, but I'm glad that we saw it through. And when they talk about having the capacity to be able to keep these projects going and alive, if we didn't have the support that we do in the community, we probably wouldn't have, we were definitely weighing on whether we had to let this project go or continue to eat up, or keep our development money tied up in one project when we had multiple other projects going on. So that's the only reason I even sway saying, would I do it all over again or not? You have to remember that Yaquina Hall is a historic building, which comes with a lot of historic challenges, down to elevators, door handles. The roof can't be changed, pretty much anything. Windows coming from New York that are three months behind on schedule and had to be completely done historically designed. So that all weighs into the factor, but yes, I would. It's just been a challenging project.
All right. And Richard, we're about 2 minutes over time, so you could just do a simple yes or no.
Yes.
All right. Big round of applause for our panel, ladies and gentlemen.